Hi, Chad Lang here. In this video I want to talk about kind of a theme that I've discussed in a couple of my other videos in regards to members of the church who react in such a way where they are shocked, surprised, hurt when they find out that you're struggling with faith issues, or that you're not the kind of person who bends over backwards to accept their religious beliefs, and that this behavior is actually not helpful, and it is harmful to people who are also struggling with self-esteem issues. So in my video on the Lord will forgive whom he forgives, which is going to be coming up again at the end of this video, I talk about the missionary who's talking with this young gentleman, and the guy just wasn't ready to accept conviction into the religion simply because the missionaries were presenting it at the time. I mean, there's lots of churches out there, and all kinds of them want to try and emotionally pressure you into joining, and it has to be their group. One of my friends had a discussion on this, and as soon as I mentioned that I was Mormon, she talks about a Methodist person that she knew who totally believed in the religion and was trying to tell her about the gospel in such a way where he felt hurt if she did not accept it right then and there. And then when you're growing up in the church and people find out, they just get wind of the fact or sniff out that you're struggling with any kind of faith issues, so you're not accepting the programming, their immediate reaction is, "Oh my God, how can this be? Now how can Jesus Christ possibly forgive you?" And this reaction is not helpful. Telling people that the devil is working on them when you find out they're struggling with these kinds of things is not helpful. In this book right here, there's a guy named Jacob who wrestles with God, and so he overcomes it. The verse says something to the effect that he struggles with God and men and overcame, and therefore he's going to be named Israel, blah blah blah. He overcame, but the fact of the matter is he wrestled with God, and I take that to mean is that he wrestled with God in his heart. There's another character in this book called Doubting Thomas that Jesus Christ talks to quite frequently, and when members of the church are all surprised and react in this way, they are completely ignoring the lessons contained in this book on how to encourage people like that, rather than be, "How can this be? Now how can Jesus Christ possibly forgive your soul? You're struggling with the faith." And this attitude and behavior's got to stop. You're doing it because that's the way the religious environment has taught you to react, and you don't know any better. So an example of what I'm going to say is that when I was 7 years old, my mom taught me that Jesus Christ died for our mistakes. Now, sins I could understand. If you commit sin, you need to be forgiven, and Jesus Christ paid the penalty for you so that God can forgive you. But human mistakes, I just couldn't wrap my head around that. And I struggled with that for a long time in my life. And so in the young single adult congregations from 18 to 33, or 31 in Calgary, when I was attending, whenever I brought this up, again, people in the classroom would just be morally shocked and surprised. "How can you have a problem with Jesus in your heart?" That's the reaction. And people struggling with faith issues is a very normal thing. This should not be a surprise to you people. It should not be a shock. It should not be a, oh, how can this be? Now how are you supposed to be forgiven if you don't just accept the programming? And that's exactly what it is too. It's indoctrination and programming. And the people who do accept it, you're growing up in the church, you have the love of your family, you have their approval, you have the approval of the other people in the congregation, in your community environment, and you're being taught that this stuff is about good. Why would you question or struggle with these things? But if you don't have those things, the approval of your family, if you're a very self-conscious person and you're being taught that as a child that you naturally deserve hell and damnation, and you're struggling with your self-esteem, maybe because you're being bullied, and so, you're having self-esteem issues, these kinds of teachings can be very detrimental to a person's self-esteem. I didn't want to lie, I didn't want to cheat, I didn't want to steal, I didn't want to kill, and yet I was being told that the devil was working on me and that I'm especially vulnerable to Satan because I'm having these faith problems. And according to Stephen Hassan in Freedom of Mind, which I talked about in my other video, it's teaching someone that there's something inherently wrong with them is part of the cult mind control indoctrination. So there you have it. You may not like me for saying it, but that's exactly what I think. So I'm going to be reading from a book here called Man of Valor, and this is a Christian book. This is not a Mormon book. And on the back here it says that this guy has no problem with having a cup of coffee with you anytime. So I'm just going to read the first page, because quite frankly I haven't read a whole lot of this book. I just have it for the first page in it. And it says, the truth about God. Are you afraid of God? Probably not, unless you were raised in a legalistic church as I was. This is another problem a lot of Latter-day Saints in the YSA, Young Single Adult congregations, don't seem to get in life. That other people are probably not afraid of God. They haven't been taught the same things that you've been taught in the church. They don't have those notions, and they just don't care about it. And this should not be a moral surprise to you. This should not be a shock. This should not be a, how can this be? This is normal. This is normal of non-believing people on planet Earth who have not been taught what you've been taught. Figure it out. Unless you were raised in a legalistic church like I was. Mormonism is very legalistic. The God of my adolescence was a cross between a medieval executioner and a hanging judge. And that's how I felt about it too as a kid growing up. When I was being taught that I had naturally deserved hell and damnation, when again I didn't want to lie, I didn't want to cheat, I didn't want to steal, I didn't want to kill, And to me, he was a God who meted out judgment with sadistic delight and extended forgiveness grudgingly, and then only to the most penitent. The mere thought of him caused me to tremble in terror. In truth, I feared him, but I did not love him. He goes on to say, as a young adult, I rejected the sadistic God of my adolescence. I simply could not live with the kind of fear and condemnation he generated in me. In place of the cruel, unloving God of my youth, I created a kinder and gentler God. Here was a God I could love, but I did not revere him. Who is the real God, the stern and distant deity of my adolescent years, or the benevolent and kindly father figure with which I replaced him? Neither, both. He goes on to then give an answer, which I'm not going to get into, but basically it is both. You got God the Father, the God of the Old Testament, who is that sadistic God, and then you got the reconciliation in Jesus Christ. But whatever. I just wanted to read this so that I could show you that this preacher person from this other religion finds the notion that struggling with God in your heart is a very normal thing, and he goes through it. And he struggled with that personally in his life. There was a gentleman in the LDS Church, the Mormon Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, when I was living in Sparwood as a teenager when I was in grade 11, and he was a convert to the church, and he struggled with the story in the Book of Mormon where Nephi kills Laban. He could not wrap his head and his heart around that for something like 8 years. Okay, he struggled with this notion. How could a prophet of God kill this person, and how could God condone it and say that it's necessary? I mean, never mind the fact that Moses tells the Israelites to completely slaughter the inhabitants of all the cities they're invading and put everyone to the sword except for all the female virgins who then you can then forcibly take as wives for yourselves. How is this moral? A lot of atheist critics and moral critics of the Bible would ask, how is the God of this book moral, is a question that they often have. So there you go. And so if that offends your religious sensibilities, if you're so hurt in your heart because someone asks that question, then you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Okay? And a lot of members of the church don't seem to get this. Not in my experience anyways. So I want to read a book, some excerpts out of a book called The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. And what this book is about is a young man named Jason Storm, and he lives in this religious community called Wannock, and they're very orthodox religious, very close-minded. Only their religious views matter in the community. Every other point of view in life is of the devil, and this is the exact attitude I've seen a lot of in the church. A lot of us versus them, insider versus outsider group thinking, where our ideas in the church are true, and every other idea in life we're going to reframe as the world. And I find that the congregations often function as an echo chamber where these ideas just get passed back and forth all the time and they're never challenged. And one of those I'm going to challenge, one of those notions is that we teach that women should be respected. The church teaches that, but the world teaches that women are toys. Never mind the fact that when I was 15, living in British Columbia, I saw commercials where a career woman chains her man to the kitchen and then she goes out and works for a living. How is that teaching that women are toy? Very left-wing propaganda, by the way. So Jason Storm, in this book right here, he finds that he's more liberal than his family. He's more understanding of people's differences. He's more empathetic towards other people. He finds that his family is incredibly judgmental, and he cannot reveal his authentic self to them for his own protection. Because if they find out that he's not a firm believer in the very strict religious thinking in his environment, he's going to be ostracized by the community, and he actually has mental powers. In this book, it takes place after a post-nuclear war, and there are people who are mutants, basically. And so they have this idea that man is in the image of God, and anything that, if you have 6 toes, then you're an abomination. And the girl that he befriends right at the beginning, she has 6 toes, and she gets found out. She has to run away, or they're going to kill her. And so he can't reveal to his family that he's more liberal and more empathetic, and that he doesn't agree with these hardline, judgmental religious notions. And he also has special telepathic powers that he can't reveal. And if he does, they're going to seek his life, which they eventually find out, and he has to get out of there. He has to run away. He has to get away from that. And so I'm going to read a couple excerpts out of this book. And okay, so he's talking. So it says, according to ethics, mankind, that was us in civilized parts, was in the process of climbing back from grace, where we followed a faint and difficult trail which led up to the peaks from which we had fallen. From the true trail branched many false trails that sometimes looked easier and more attractive. All these really led to the edges of precipices, beneath which lay the abyss of eternity. There was only one true trail, and by following it we should, with God's help and in His own good time, regain all that had been lost. But so faint was the trail, so set with traps and deceits, that every step must be taken with caution, and it too was dangerous for man to rely on his own judgment. Only the authorities, ecclesiastical and lay, were in a position to judge whether the next step was a rediscovery, and so safe to take, or whether it deviated from the true reascent, and so was sinful. So this is the religious mindset that I see so often, is that this one true trail concept, no other way of life is acceptable, no other point of view is acceptable. And as soon as we get wind of the fact that you're considering other notions, or that you're having a hard time accepting the programming, how can this be? How can Jesus Christ forgive you? Is the reaction, and the devil's working on you. I'm so sad that this trial had to come into your life, and that you had to be this kind of person who struggles with accepting the religious programming, and I really don't appreciate that, because people do struggle, and if that's going to be your reaction, if that's going to be your attitude, then you're part of the problem, not the solution. Okay, and so he's talking with his uncle, and his uncle's talking about sailing in different parts of the world and discovering all kinds of abominations all over the place, or people who are in the image of God, but the only difference is they have black skin instead of white skin, and challenging the religious notions of the time. And he says, all right, Davy boy, that's fair enough. So as long as you'll not chatter, I'll tell you something about it. You mean it's a secret? I asked, puzzled. Not quite that, he said, but when people are used to believing a thing in such and such a way, and the preachers want them to believe that, that's the way it is. It's trouble you get, not thanks for upsetting their ideas. And yeah, that's pretty much my life experience, in a nutshell. And if that's the way you're going to be about it, again, as far as I'm concerned, you're part of the problem, not the solution. So you may not like me for saying it. You may think I'm the worst person ever. You may think I'm the reincarnation of the Antichrist. I don't care. You know what? Someone's got to tell you that you're being religiously ridiculous. So that's what I'm saying. And if you want to have a problem with it, if you're my family and you want to have a problem with it, disown me. I don't care. It needs to be said. And I think a lot of people are being religiously ridiculous in a lot of ways, but I'm going to pick on this one for now, because this one has had serious emotional consequences to my personal self-esteem. And I grew up in a very liberal left-wing environment, and when I came over to Alberta, which is very conservative and right-wing, and the church is very Mormon Corridor, Utah, in its views of life in the world, and people just don't understand the notions that I'm trying to get across in this video, and they just don't get that that's my background, and they think that I should just sacrifice whatever it is I previously thought in the world in order to embrace the religious notions that they're trying to teach me, and so I invite the missionaries or home teachers into my house, and they think they can just read from the Book of Mormon, and that I'm going to feel overjoyed by it, and fall madly in love with the gospel, and embrace everything immediately in this concept that the general authorities talk about, the mighty change of heart is more gradual. They just do not get that concept. So, you know what? And a lot of members of the church, in my experience, don't get that concept. They expect me to fall down for 3 days in a coma like Alma the Younger and get up and be totally converted. And that has never happened. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. So this is getting into 20 minutes on my rant here. I think I'm going to wrap it up. That's what I have to say about it. I'm Chad Lang. Have a nice life.